This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
Now it's time to meet Mr. Guitar Hero. Charles Wang is here today with us. Charles and his brother Kai started Red Octane in 1999. Great time to start a company. And at the time, it was the first online game
rental
service, right? And then, as you probably all know, in 2005, this amazing game, Guitar Hero, was released. And a year later, they sold their company to Activision. Charles graduated with a BA in Economics and Asian Studies here at UC Berkeley. Charles, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of years since I've been on the campus. I've been, in fact, in this auditorium for a class years and years ago. Not much has changed here, in this auditorium anyway. And hopefully this experience will be better than when I was in here taking classes. So back in November of '99, we started what was back then originally called webgamezone.com, which that by itself should tell you what era that was in. We had to throw in web and .com at the same time, which was an online game rental service. It worked just like Netflix, except for video games. And we were the first in the world to do that. We launched that probably about, I think about 3 or 4 months after Netflix had launched their service. And it was just my brother and I back then. And so we launched this thing with a couple of, with just a little bit of investment from family and friends. And as I like to say, this was back in the dot-com bubble where, I was telling people earlier, if you had a PowerPoint, you could get $1 million. And if that PowerPoint presentation was any good, you'd probably get a couple $1 million. Those days have gone, but that's how we started, was an online game rental service. And shortly thereafter, in April 2000, the stock market crashed, and all the illustrious dot-com companies disappeared along with it. And that was an amazing time. It was actually, in retrospect, probably one of the best things that could have happened, because it took away a lot of the froth. There was just a lot of craziness. Amazing amounts of money were being thrown around by venture capitalists into companies. People were doing incredibly ridiculous deals with each other, all in an effort to drive eyeballs and drive press. But what this crash here did for us, which is probably very similar to the environment it's in that we're in today, is it gave us some lessons that we use to build our business throughout the rest of the history of Red Octane. And one of the first lessons that we learned was that revenue and profits were more important than anything else in our business. Before that, there was a lot of thought being put into really fancy business models, being the first to do this. It was all about how many eyeballs. There were a lot of metrics for measuring a business. But what we learned was when the financial markets shut off, like they did in April 2000, and you couldn't get any funding of any kind from anybody, the only thing that you could do was you had to generate revenues and you had to generate profits. And that was the only way to survive. And luckily for us, it was very early in our history where we learned this, because simply at that point, we just assumed that for the rest of our company's history, we would never be able to raise any money from any venture capitalist. Because that's what it looked like at that time. In April 2000, it looked like this world, the technology sort of startup world, was going to end, and you were never going to get money from anybody for anything. So that was the first lesson, the first important lesson that I would share. It's not necessarily, I think, the path to success for everyone, but for us, that was a key pillar that we built our company on, was revenue and profits above all else. Now, how do we get to revenues and profits? And that was sort of the second lesson that we applied early on, was we learned to listen to the consumer. Because we started as an online game rental service, we had direct access to the consumer. And what we had to do was we had to figure out, by listening to the consumer, what the consumers were doing. We didn't try to figure out where the market was going by reading what the industry analysts were saying. We didn't ask people in the industry, mostly because we didn't have access to people in the industry. We were a small company where for the first 5 years, we didn't actually hire anybody that had ever worked in a video game company. So the only thing we could do was we had access to consumers. So we listened to what the consumers were doing and tried to figure out where they were going and figure out what we could do to generate revenues and profits by selling products to the consumer. So in our particular world at that time, we had to go out and figure out what were the consumers, what were video game consumers doing? And the answer is pretty simple. For us, in particular in our rental service at that time, we had access to a market where, this was PlayStation 1 days, for those of you guys, some of you guys may be too young to remember PlayStation 1. But on the PS1, you could mod the PS1 so you could play games that were available only in Japan, for instance. And at that time, back in 99, 2000, there was a game in Japan that was incredibly popular called Dance Dance Revolution. That was a huge hit throughout Asia. And that game was not brought to the United States for whatever reason until much later. But at that time, there were people that wanted to play this game, and they couldn't. And the only way they could access it was through a rental service like ours. We were the only ones that were renting games from Japan, like Dance Dance Revolution. So the interesting thing was, they rented the game, they would ask us, well, we need these dance pads, these things that you see here to play the game. If you've ever seen it, it's basically set to music, arrows scroll up, and you have to hit these arrows with your feet. And they couldn't get these dance pads anywhere because this game was not available in the United States. So what we figured out was, well, there seems to be a market here where people want these dance pads so they could play this game, but they couldn't buy them. So our first thought was, well, let's just sell it to them. And then once we started selling dance pads, we just bought them and sold it to people who were renting these games from us. Through that process, we learned, well, a lot of these pads that people were buying were very, very low quality. They were breaking down after just a few days of use. So our next idea was, based on what our consumers were telling us, because every time something broke down, they would return it to us. They would email us and tell us what broke. They would tell us how to improve the products. So based on just that information that we gathered from the consumers, we figured out, hey, we can make better dance pads. So we set out as part of the next part of our business to building dance pads, our own branded dance pads that we designed. So what happened at that point was I packed my bags, went over to China, found out where the factories were that were making these dance pads, figured out how they were making them, and then we took our ideas, put them into a design, and had them build dance pads for us. And we started building initially dance pads that were priced sort of at the market price level, which was $20. And then we decided we could build better dance pads, so we priced them at $50. And what we learned from that experience was that video game consumers, which is a very sort of enthusiast market, they're willing to pay higher prices for better quality products, which is very counterintuitive to what a lot of other video game companies were doing, which was finding ways to sell cheaper products. So we started trying to make better and better quality products, but pricing them higher. So we made $50 dance pads at a time when the market was selling $20 dance pads. Then we made this Ignition dance pad that was a $100 dance pad. And at that time, when we first started approaching retailers about selling this product, we'd already sold it in our online store. So we knew people were willing to pay $100. And they told us we were crazy. They said, why would people pay for $100 for something they could get in the store for $20? But what we knew was, again, we knew from the consumers who were telling us that they were willing to pay this money, and they were actually paying $100 for this, that even though it cost 5x what the competitive products were, that there was a market for it. We eventually got it into retail, and crazy enough, this $100 product, again, 5x what the competition's product was, became the #1 selling dance pad in the United States. And so what we learned from that again was, consumers, video game enthusiasts were willing to pay for a quality product as long as you delivered what they were looking for. So here we were a couple years later, thanks to these dance pads, these crazy dance pads, we were generating enough revenues and profits to keep afloat. And through all these years, all these companies that we had seen around us in Silicon Valley were going out of business because they couldn't raise any more money. We had managed to stay alive, and we decided that we needed to see what the future of our business was going to be, and we had to grow. And one of the things that we quickly learned about being in the dance pad business was we weren't in control of our destiny. Because the company that was making the game at that time, which is a Japanese company called Konami, they made the game Dance Dance Revolution. If they decided tomorrow that, hey, we're not going to do this video game anymore, then we'd be out of business because we sold a product that was basically complementary to theirs. So what we learned, third very important lesson for us, was that we had to be in control of our future. So for us, what that meant was that a lot of these companies didn't want, we were specializing at that time in music games, right? We were building hardware for music games and to gain a reputation and a brand as a high-end music game peripheral manufacturer. A lot of the software developers and software publishers decided that there's no market in the US for music games. Because they were looking at sales data, which tends to be very backward looking. You look at sales data to see what's sold in the past, but it doesn't always tell you what it's going to sell in the future. But we knew from talking to consumers, hey, there was demand. We didn't know how much demand, but we knew there was demand for music games in North America. Despite all investors and retailers telling us, no, music games just don't sell in North America. We knew there was a market for it because we talked to consumers. And again, that was our second lesson was, it doesn't matter what anybody tells you. The only people that you should really listen to when you build a product is the consumer. If the consumer tells you, yes, they will buy the product, then you don't have to worry about anybody else that tells you otherwise. So what we decided at that point was we knew there was a market for music video games, and we had to be able to control our own future by developing our own software. So we got into the market of being a video game publisher, and we did our first game, which was a dance game called In the Groove, back in 2005. It was a dance game that was very similar to Dance Dance Revolution. It was also a way for us to leverage our brand in dance pads. And this game did moderately successful. It was commercially okay, didn't set the world on fire. But what it did do was it made enough money for us to make our second game, which was Guitar Hero 1. We went out there, and what was funny was early on when we were going through the process of developing In the Groove, we had come to a conclusion that we wanted to build a guitar-based game. And when we thought about that, we said, well, if you're going to build a guitar-based game, it should be based on rock music. And that's what we had this concept that we wanted to build that game. It wasn't clear that it was going to be Guitar Hero, but we just thought we want to build a game that's based around a guitar, peripheral, and rock music. And then we went out, we had met a couple of years later a developer named Harmonix based in Boston. They were a bunch of guys that were ex-MIT Media Labs folks. And they'd been working on some really creative music games that also weren't selling. And we went to them and said, hey, guys, we've been thinking about doing a guitar game based on rock and roll. And they came back and they said, that's funny. We've been thinking about doing a guitar game for a while, too. And so we got together, and within a span of very quickly, a few months, we decided, hey, we were going to make a game called Guitar Hero. And what's funny was this game came together very quick. It's sort of one of those things that I call, there are experiences in life when you're making products where, for whatever reason, you get people and everything's sort of synced up, and you just know it works. And everybody's on the right wavelength. We probably started the project in February and released it in November, which is, at that time, unheard of for a video game. I mean, normally cycles take 12, 18 months. A lot of video games today take 24 months to build. We did ours in probably 8 to 9 months' time. But what was interesting was people often ask us, so at what point did you know Guitar Hero was going to be a hit? So what I was brought in today, this is something which we actually just dug up not too long ago from somebody's desk, is a video of the first build of Guitar Hero, which not many people outside of our company have ever seen. And just to show you what sort of, how simple it is, but in video games, I think whatever project you embark on, whatever products you intend to build, you have to understand sort of what is the core essence that you're selling. In our case, it was fun. All video games, you're selling fun. And what you want to do is try to get to the fastest point where you can determine if this is fun or not. And so this was the point where we realized we had something that was fun. What you would have seen on the screen, what the video actually was the first build was actually just 5 dots across the screen, 5 colored dots across a black screen. And these dots were falling down. And it was set to a song, Dope Nose by Weezer. And it was just set to that one song. And these dots would come down, and you had to hit them when they got to the bottom of the screen. And that's all it was. There was no visuals. There was no characters. There was nothing. There was just 5 colored dots falling down on the screen. If you've ever played an Atari 2600 game, the very first video game console, that's what it looked like. It looked like actually a very simple Atari 2600 game. But what we saw from that was when we put it in the office, people would actually stick around and play that game, that one song that was in that one game, for a couple hours. They would stay after work and play that song, and play that game. And it was the stupidest tech demo because the game actually, it ran in a loop. So actually when it got done, it just kept looping, and you had to shut the PS2 off and turn it back on in order to play it again. And people would, even though it was so cumbersome, people literally stayed after work to play that. And so we knew at that moment that we got that build that, hey, this was fun. There was enough fun here that people would actually stay after work to play. And again, that was sort of, you know, what we were after. We deduced that product down to the minute you know you have fun, that's when you can charge full speed and you know that you've got a successful product. We didn't really know how successful it would be, but we knew that we had a successful product that people would pay for. So the game was done, all the software and all the hardware was done in September of 2005. And it had won a lot of critical acclaim, actually. At E3, which is the big video game industry trade show, we had won awards for Best of Show. We were doing previews of the game through various magazines and websites, and everything was very positive. However, we still had trouble convincing retailers to sell the product. For whatever reason, they still clung to the sort of truisms of the past, saying, Americans will never buy music games. The box is too big for retail. The box was that size, and they said, yeah, this will just never fit in a Walmart shelf, so you can't get this in mass distribution. They were saying peripheral-based games don't sell, because up until that point, this was true. But we knew there was a market for it. But we managed to convince 2 retailers in America to take the product. The other thing that we had to do once we had the retailers that were willing to take the product was we actually needed to raise some money, a small amount of money to fund all the inventory build-out and the working capital for getting this actually into retail distribution. So what we went out in September to do was to raise $3 million to fund the launch of Guitar Hero 1. The funny thing was we couldn't get anybody, none of the VCs, to bite on this. And that was one of the other lessons that we learned, was don't let investor objections stop a great idea. Because a lot of people told us, well, how did you launch this thing without any backing? Well, what we had to do then was, we knew we had a good product. People were telling us, consumers were telling us we had a good product. So we couldn't get VC funding, so my brother and I put second mortgages on our house. We took out whatever credit card debt we could. We borrowed money from friends and family, however much we could. We cobbled as much money as we could together, and we launched Guitar Hero 1 with it. Going back to talk to the VCs later, it was funny that the reasons that they were giving us for why they couldn't invest in a game like Guitar Hero was, they would say to us, we don't invest in hit-driven businesses. Video games, movies, most entertainment products are hit-driven businesses. And there's a certain rationale to it, because what they would tell us is, well, if you showed me three racing games or 3 shooter games, I can't tell you which one is going to do better than the others. So they would say, well, we don't invest in hit-driven businesses. And my usual reply to them was, well, isn't the VC business a hit-driven business? and they usually didn't like that too much. So some other things that people would tell us was, hey, that looks like a great game. Too bad you're going to go out of business trying to sell it. And again, this was very much the sort of approach of people looking at what products sold in the past for a prediction of what's going to sell in the future. So they looked up sales data and said, yeah, music games just don't sell in North America. So you guys are, you're winning awards, you're winning great reviews, but this game just isn't going to sell. And you're going to go out of business trying to sell it. We didn't really have an answer for that, except that we knew once it got out the door that it was going to do okay. We didn't have, again, high expectations, but we thought it would do okay. And then a third objection, my favorite actually, one of the investors told me years later that he said, you were two random brothers with a plastic guitar. They said, that's not an investable business. They said, if I went in front of my partners and said, I want to invest in this plastic guitar, they would laugh me out of the partnership. And that one, truly, afterwards I thought about it. I said, yeah, you're probably right. That was not really an investable business, the business of making plastic guitars. So, we took out all the money we could from credit cards, second mortgages, whatever we could borrow, whoever was willing to lend us some money. We launched the game, and instantly the game was a hit. We were getting back photos like this. It was crazy. We had never anticipated that people would actually take Guitar Hero with it, take two Guitar Hero was as much passion. The game was sold out almost everywhere instantly. I recall the first day. When you do launches, especially for an entertainment product, whether it's a movie or a video game, day one is an enormous thing. All your marketing leads up to day one, and it's an incredibly exciting thing to go through. And basically, the minute you step in the office on day one, everybody's looking for data. Hey, how's it selling? What's it, in the movie industry, they're looking for a box office. In our industry, they're looking for day one sales. One of the retailers that took our product had given us a forecast. They said, we think we could sell maybe about 30,000 units of Guitar Hero for the Christmas season. And they called us up after the first 2 hours, and they said, hey, we just sold 3,000 in the first 2 hours. We need 80,000 next week. And we told them, no. The way this works is we have to build these plastic guitars in China, and then they get shipped overseas on a boat. And so next week we have 5,000, and you're going to have to split it with somebody else. And so instantly it became that Christmas. It was Christmas 2005. That was probably the hardest video game to get was Guitar Hero, and simply because we were bottlenecked by this manufacturing process of making plastic guitars in China. But it worked to our advantage in that sort of scarcity and creates buzz, especially for products like video games, where this happened recently with the Nintendo Wii for a couple years. That scarcity drives more attention. People were selling it on eBay. All these crazy things that happen when you have demand way outstripping supply worked in our favor for a long time. So we made a hit game, Guitar Hero 1. We had rabid fan passion for the game, and what happens when you make a hit game? Well, companies like Activision, they come calling to you, and then they offer you a lot of money to buy your company, and they make you very happy. And so in September, we couldn't raise even $3 million from venture capitalists. And by, within about 8 or 9 months, we'd sold the company to Activision, which was still unbelievable to me, because that whole thing, we finally understood what it meant to be in a hit-driven business when we got a hit. And what's happened with Guitar Hero since then is it's become really a pop culture phenomenon, which we never anticipated. It was the fastest video game franchise to reach $1 billion in sales. It was the #1 selling video game brand for the calendar year 2007 and 2008. We had appearances on television shows from The Simpsons to Ellen, South Park did an entire episode. I don't know if you saw that, Guitar Hero. Yeah, that was a. It actually, when we first heard they were going to do a episode, we thought, oh, this could be really bad. They could just lampoon us to no end. But it actually turned out pretty well. That actually we found out later. I don't know why, but that was apparently the #1 highest viewed South Park episode of that year. We're also one of 2 video games in the world today that generate $1 billion in sales. The other is World of Warcraft by Blizzard Entertainment, for those of you who play. That was the other game that South Park did an episode. They did that first, and they lampooned that pretty bad. That's why we were very worried. So, we've done Guitar Hero. We've done a lot of different versions of Guitar Hero. And people ask us, well, what's next? So what we worked on next are a couple of different products that are coming out this Christmas. Just thought I'd share a bit of it with you. One is called Band Hero, which, interesting enough, is exactly the same features as Guitar Hero 5. So it's a full band game. But what we chose to do was we look at the music game world sort of along 2 axes. And one of them was, when we first started, music instruments. So you had guitars, you had drums, vocals, whatever. You have a whole bunch of instruments that you could try to build. And then the other axis we looked at was just genres of music. So some of them fit with each other, some of them don't. So for instance, guitar and hip hop just doesn't fit, which is why we had to make the game DJ Hero. Band Hero was basically an attempt to take Guitar Hero and the instruments that we've built, the plastic guitar and the plastic drums and the microphone, and apply more pop, more vocal-driven music to it. So the feature artist for Band Hero is, this Christmas, is actually Taylor Swift. For DJ Hero, this was a completely different approach. What we came out with this, the concept was that we wanted to look at music genres that we hadn't touched yet. And the one actually initially that came to mind was hip hop. We really wanted to do something with hip hop music that we couldn't do with a guitar and a drum. And then the second thing that we wanted to do, once we decided that we were going to do hip hop, was we wanted to do more music for European audiences. And so electronica music was the other genre of music that we really wanted to touch on. So we built this game called DJ Hero, which is played with a controller that is basically a turntable and a crossfader and 3 buttons. And there's your basic game mechanic, is the crossfader, and there's a scratch, and there's 3 buttons that you have to hit. The featured artists on DJ Hero are Jay-Z and Eminem, mostly for North America. And in Europe, for electronica music, Daft Punk and David Guetta. So it gives us a whole new chance to play with music, genres of music that we haven't ever had a chance to explore with Guitar Hero, because Guitar Hero was mostly classic rock and metal. And that gives us a chance to expand into a different vector. And DJ Hero and Band Hero are sort of our next products beyond Guitar Hero that are coming this Christmas. I originally had another movie, but I guess this won't work. All right, well, I was going to show you a TV trailer that we had done for DJ Hero featuring Daft Punk. But unfortunately, you will have to, all you get to see is the ESYB ratings. So essentially, that is the history of how we created Guitar Hero and the lessons that we learned from coming into an environment where we knew that there had to be 100% focus on revenues and profits because we couldn't survive otherwise, to also learning the way to revenues and profits was to listen to the consumer and not listening to anybody else, not listening to investors, not listening to retailers, not listening to industry analysts, just listen to the consumer. And finally, controlling our own future, being able to produce products and then grow into other products that would allow us to control our own destiny is eventually how we got to going from online video game rental services to creating Guitar Hero. So, since I don't have the movies, we'll jump right into the Q&A session. I think we've got some time for that.
Hi, thanks for doing this presentation. Since you were not able to raise VC capital before the launch of Guitar Hero, is there anything creative that you did with the marketing or the pre-launch build-up? How were you able to do that?
Yeah, that was, well, our essential launch marketing budget ended up being $30,000 because that's all we had left. Because we poured everything into the actual inventory. So one of the first things that we learned about Guitar Hero was that there was a certain magic to it. It was very difficult to describe. What we learned early on was that the product that we had couldn't be conveyed on a one-page ad or a 15-second or 30-second television commercial. Actually, the most effective thing we learned was that there was a certain magic when you put the game in people's hand. Because when they first see it, they go, what? That's a plastic guitar? You know, what are you supposed to do with that? And then you say, just take it and try it. In fact, we learned from one of the reviewers. He said he absolutely refused to play Guitar Hero 1 because he thought it was stupid. And then he said somebody in his office finally told him, on Guitar Hero 2, you got to try this thing. You just got to try this thing. And he said he put the guitar on. He said, from that second, I knew exactly what this game was about. He said, I didn't even have to play the game. I knew why everybody loved it. So what we learned was you had to try the game in order to understand what the magic was. So what we did was we focused all of our time and energy and money on doing demos. So we had stores set up, in-store demos where you could actually try the product. That we found to be the most effective marketing strategy. In fact, one of the retailers that did this told us that they looked at sales data across the stores that had put up demos versus stores that didn't have demos, and found the stores with demos outsold 9-to-1 the stores that didn't have demos. So we learned that was, on some products, they're just crazy, and you just can't convince people why they should buy it unless you let them, give them an opportunity to touch it, to feel it, to play with it. And that was the case with Guitar Hero. Sorry. Oh, okay, I guess. Okay. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that you got all the way across the country to work with some MIT people to, release Guitar Hero. So I just wanted to ask how you built that connection, and also maybe if you approached other people and didn't succeed getting to work with them or things like that. Like, how did that come about?
In that specific instance, we had actually known Harmonix for a couple of years. We were introduced to them originally through Sony, because they had developed some games for Sony. And Sony had approached us about trying to make hardware for the games that Harmonix was building for them. But in general, the way the music industry works is it's very sort of fragmented in terms of there's studios all over the world, and they will work on projects with publishers all over the world. And this is something which we've also found very effective was we didn't necessarily need to build 100% of all the expertise in-house, because it actually gets very expensive, especially in this area. If you want to hire, you want to do all of your software development in-house, you want to do all of your hardware development in-house, you want to do all of your marketing in-house, all of that adds up to a lot of fixed overhead costs. So what we tried to do as much as we could was outsource huge chunks of it. We tried to figure out which parts of our business were critical to our success. We tried to own that, and everything else we tried to outsource. And we found out that was sort of the most capital efficient way to try to build a business. Again, in an environment where you couldn't go out to a VC and ask for 10, 20, $30 million, that was the only way we could do it. And it is actually very efficient in our industry, and I think in most industries.
So didn't Harmonix go in and start working on Rock Band after? Like, how did that change the dynamic in your company?
Yeah. That was a funny episode because we actually got along really well with them, and what people in the industry told us afterwards was like, "Hey, this is like a real rock band. You guys got together, made a great game, then you split up and you started, it's like competing bands. It's like almost like a real life story, version of what happens in rock and roll." But what happened in that specific instance was we were acquired by Activision. They were acquired by another company, Viacom. And I guess previous to that, the two companies had sued each other over something or other. We don't know what it was. But So as a result, the two parent companies were not very enthusiastic about working with each other. And so we had to then, starting with Guitar Hero 3, take the software and move it to an in-house Activision studio to develop, which was a studio called Neversoft. And then they started working on a competing product called Rock Band. And and so that's how sort of the two of us who were partnered together then got split up and started making competing products. Oh.
So it sounds like you were involved in like a lot of different parts of the business. What was your favorite part? What part did you really like the most?
What part did I like the most? That's a good question. Well, it wasn't the part about mortgaging my house. I would say that the part I enjoy most is in the particular approach that we took, in that we outsource a lot of things. That instead of trying to build and find all the creative ideas internally, we had a policy basically where we would go anywhere in the world and talk to anybody that was building a music game to see if we could work together. And that sort of cross-fertilization of ideas, so going to Asia and finding out what people in Asia were building in terms of music video games, and going to Europe and finding out what people were building there, and going to all around the country and talking to people. I think that creative part was incredibly fun. The video game, making a video game is needless to say, it is just an incredibly fun process. I mean, you have a lot of very passionate people in the industry who work on it. I'll give you one example of that. Most programmers, developers in the game industry actually get paid less versus similarly skilled programmers in other sectors of technology. And people would always ask me, well, why is that? And I would say, well, it's very simple. Kids don't grow up dreaming of being database developers, right? They grow up dreaming of making video games, some of them. And the ones that do, that's what they want to do. It's a passion in their life. So most of the people in the industry are working out of passion. That's what they wanted to do. They played video games ever since, Super Mario Brother. And that's what they want to do. So you have a bunch of people who are really passionate, enthusiastic, and talking to them about making new games was incredibly fun.
When you were bringing Guitar Hero from concept to product, you said you ended up syncing with the right people. Do you have any tips for finding the right team or syncing with the right people?
Yeah, I think, so one of the first things that helps is that you have, again, passion for product. So we were kind of toiling, both of us at that time, toiling in a genre of video games that most people didn't believe in. So all the successful video game developers and all the successful video game publishers really didn't do anything with Guitar Hero, or didn't do anything with music. So I think typically when you start off in a new venture, you are working in an area where there's a lot of skepticism around it. If there's a lot of enthusiasm, you might want to rethink what you're doing because usually ideas are not that easy. Or very disruptive ideas are not that easy for people to accept. And so when you're doing that, you tend to meet other people who are also facing and toiling through the same issues that you are. So having worked for years in music games and then running into somebody else who's worked for years in music games, there was just sort of a very natural connection where we knew all the struggles that they had gone through trying to convince people that music games would sell in North America. So I think you want to look for people that are facing similar challenges that you face, because if they're still doing it despite all the obstacles, then they're probably very passionate about it. So I think passion is one. And then the other thing, typically I find that was helpful was they were also a startup that was about similar size and revenues and employees as we were. And I think organizationally that works better. A lot of the times, it's just the way it is with organizational structures is that there's a certain momentum which big organizations have and a certain momentum which smaller organizations have. Small organizations tend to work well with smaller organizations, and big organizations tend to work well with big organizations. And that's a lot of the times, in our experience, that's worked out well for us. When we were small, we tried to work with smaller companies.
Yes. Since the first version of the game, I mean, it's been pretty similar, I guess, in concept to Dance Dance, where you have these, color keys and you're pressing them. Do you see kind of like, this concept of how the user or the consumer plays this game changing throughout time? Maybe, I don't know, changing to being chords rather than, just plastic colored keys as the technology evolves, or do you see that it's a concept that will stick for a long time?
Right. Well, one of the things that we always had to do was, I would describe it this way. We split up in terms of music into two groups, in terms of who we're trying to serve. There was people that produce music, so musicians and aspiring musicians, and people that consume music, people who just want to listen, who want to interact with music. Our target audience was always the people that consume music. So to give you an idea of different products, if you bought a guitar, you were a producer of music. A piano, you made music. If you bought an iPod, you were a consumer of music. And our thought was always the market for consuming music was a lot bigger than the market for producing music. So in every game that we built, we tried to, if it came down to a feature that fell on one side or the other, like this feature would be really cool for people that wanted to produce music, versus this feature was really cool for people that wanted to consume music, we would always lean generally on the consumption side. Because even though it was music, so the 5-button guitar is not a 6-string guitar, and we knew that. But we also knew the minute you put 6 strings in front of people, it gets very hard, and people won't want to play that because it's hard. If it was easy, then all of us could play guitars. So you had to make a product. That was the fine balancing point. You had to make a product that for that brief instance, in our game, it wasn't even really about sort of simulating a guitar. What we actually thought we were selling you was, our marketing tagline was "Unleash your inner rock star," which was for that brief half a second, we wanted to make you feel like you were a rock star. And that's what we thought we were selling you, was that dream. So for that one brief half a second, whatever it was that made you feel like you were a rock star, if we could achieve that, that we felt would be the key to success. And so we never went towards looking at features that would allow people to get closer and closer to playing a real guitar. It was always features that would allow you to consume music in a different way, and then made you feel like, through that experience, that you were a rock star.
More question?
How do you differentiate Band Hero from Rock Band?
So Band Hero, in our case, Band Hero was more differentiated with just in Guitar Hero in terms of how we evolved by music genre. So we figured if you were a rock metal fan, you didn't really want to buy a game that had a lot of pop music on it mixed in with heavy metal. So you didn't really want to buy Metallica songs and a bunch of pop music. So what we tried to do was we tried to split that into those two games. So Band Hero is more pop, and Guitar Hero is more rock. Now by today, Guitar Hero 5 and Band Hero both have a full set of instruments. So you can play guitar, you can play drum, you can sing. So in terms of the feature set, it works. In the music instruments that you could play, it works. Both Band Hero, Guitar Hero, and Rock Band all work the same way.
Sounds like you've been very successful with your product. If you could do it all over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Yeah, that's something that occasionally we do think about. I think, if we had to do it again, the one thing that we probably would have done differently was we probably would have worked more in the music, sort of gone down more path of creating music consumption services and less just being strictly a video game. So by that, I mean, there were days where I had dreams that, hey, we should take on iTunes one of these days as being the primary way, iTunes and iPod, as the primary way people interact with music. What we realized after doing all these was music games was a new way for people to interact with music. So you had the first generation, which was just audio. So you just listened to music. And then you had music videos come along, and people watched music as well as listened to it. And then when music games came along, you could interact with music in a different way than you could ever before. So we believe that was powerful. We believe that was a new way for people to interact with music. And one of the things we wanted to do was to take that experience, but in a much broader way, and to create new experiences for people in terms of interacting with music, rather than getting, well, I wouldn't say pigeonholed, because Guitar Hero itself became an incredibly successful product. But rather than trying to define ourselves as a video game, to look at ourselves as a way for people to experience music.
Well, thank you.